actively leads strategic planning in dozens of companies of all sizes in a wide variety of industries with amazing results. His real-world management experience and Ivy League MBA enable Robert to bring real nuts and bolts strategic thinking into every speech he makes. At the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, Robert has successfully assisted many clients ranging from insurance companies, auto parts manufacturers, and environmental services firms. Robert is going to lead us today in analyzing strategic thinking, a subject he has studied and researched at length. Robert, take it away.
Thank you, Dana. Today we're going to be talking about strategic thinking, and to begin I'd like to spend a little bit of time just talking about why strategic thinking is important. There are three key concepts I'd like you to think about relating to this. The first is that we're creatures of optimization. What that means is that individuals, when they're making decisions, like to choose the thing that they think is the best for them, gives them the best deal, and so on. This is true both for people making decisions about what they do with their work, but also it's true for our customers making decisions about whether they're going to buy from us. Also, markets tend to reward the unique and remarkable. If things are not unique and they are unremarkable, what markets will tend to do, because they're optimizing, is they're going to select based on whoever has the lowest price, which means your profitability tends to be minimized if you look like other people. The third point that's important to remember is that it's human to prefer easy tasks. And that means a number of different things, but in strategic thinking, one of the key things we have to think about is that inside our organization, people are going to prefer to do the easiest things, and outside of our organization, both customers and suppliers will tend to want to do the easiest things. This means that success for us means we have to think about how we can make it easy for people to make choices that are good for our organization. Before I talk more about strategic thinking, I want to talk a little bit about the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning. This process has been taught to well over 12,000 organizations over the past 25 years. I personally have done over 1,500 strategic planning meetings, wrote the best-selling book on strategic planning, which is called Simplified Strategic Planning. We have an average execution rate that's over 2 times the average of people who do strategic planning in the United States, and our clients include 3 of the best companies to work for in the U.S. Strategy, the way we think about it, is the way that you think about how you're going to take your organization from where you are today to where you want to be in the future. And as you can see in this diagram, there are all sorts of environmental variables that we're going to have to steer through in order to do this successfully. They may include your markets, your competition, technology, and so on. But good strategy also has to be implemented to really have an effect. And so we not only want to think about coming up with a strategy, but also coming up with a set of integrated and compatible actions which are going to drive us in the direction of our strategy. This is a really important point for strategic thinking, because one of the things we have to do is make it easy for people to do the things that are going to move us forward and move us in the right direction. And also, we need to test the things that we're thinking of implementing to make sure that they, in fact, will move us in the direction we want them to. Anything that's strategic is going to revolve around one of 3 questions. The first question is, what are we going to do? And that may sound like a very simple question. You know, if you're a car manufacturer, you're going to make cars. But the specifics of it, what are we going to do in a way that is unique and remarkable and valuable for customers, it can be very, very detailed and require a lot of agonizing sometimes. Not just because you're deciding what you're going to do, but good strategy, it requires a focused answer that also implies what you are not going to do. The second point, the second strategic question is, for whom are we going to do it? Again, could seem like an easy question, but the for whom can be a very important part of your focus. And you can gain a lot of strategic leverage by having a good focus on a type of customer that resonates well with your business. The third strategic question is, how do we beat, or better yet, avoid competition? And I say better yet because competition in business is a little bit like getting in a fist fight, and I don't know if you've ever been in one, but you're still, even if you win, you're probably likely to run away getting hit a few times. You're going to have a black eye, maybe a bloody nose or a fat lip, and you're going to get hurt. And competition is like that. Competition always hurts. So one of the most important concepts in good strategic thinking is thinking about how we can do things that other people are not going to choose to compete with us on. Strategic thinking basically involves thinking about choices that are going to optimize our potential in those ways, and it is also thinking that is going to focus our resources in support of these choices. So just as strategic planning is planning for optimizing our potential, strategic thinking is thinking about things that will optimize our potential. One of the important distinctions is strategic thinking is something that everyone in your organization can do at some level and probably should be doing on a day-to-day basis. Whereas most organizations will do strategic planning based on, for example, quite commonly an annual cycle of planning. The purpose of strategic thinking is to optimize your potential in terms of three things. We want to look at profitability, growth, survivability, and growth ability. And I want you to note that we're looking at the ability to do these things. We'll talk about why that's important later on, but it's a really key concept that focus on improving your abilities to get what you want is more strategically important than focusing on getting what you want at any point in time. So there are three keys to strategic thinking I want to be talking with you about today. The first is understanding the system you are in, and we'll talk about systems thinking and how it relates to strategic thinking. I think it's a really critical point. When I see companies that have succeeded very well with strategic planning, it's almost always because there's been some really excellent systems thinking that's gone into understanding their place in the world and their place in their markets. The second key is understanding the minds of people. People make decisions for their own reasons, not for yours, and you may want people to make decisions for different reasons, but the reality is we aren't going to change anyone's brain, but we can take advantage of the thought processes that they're going through. The third key is understanding strategic competency. This is a very specific concept that's quite powerful for companies to really assess some key questions about where they should really be heading, where they should be leaning, and what their focus really should be. In many organizations where I've come in and done strategic planning, worried about the focus in the organization, understanding strategic competency has given us a simple and effective way to think about where the focus should be and also to communicate it to other people in the organization. So we're going to start by talking about the first key to strategic thinking, understanding the system that you are in. And to do this, I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about how we understand systems. And there are a couple of key points in understanding systems that I want you to get. The first is the idea of stocks and flows. And what I mean by stocks and flows is that in any system, any complex system, there are things that accumulate and they flow around, and we'll talk about how that works. Before I do that, I want to give you a couple of key things that underlie a lot of my thinking and the material that we're presenting. And this mostly comes from understanding how the human brain works. The brain is a phenomenal part of the human body, and it really controls a lot of what we think. And the way the brain works, if you use it, it can make it easier to learn things and easier to use them. So the first thing I want you to think about is that we use what we remember. So I'm going to try and give you information that you can incorporate into your memory very easily. The second thing is, because we use what we remember short lists, usually 5 to 7 items. So we want to try and keep things within that framework of 5 to 7 things. We forget the complex, and so, for example, a long list of things or a complicated list is very likely to be forgotten. And we also tend to recognize exceptions. All of these things, if we understand them, can help us not only to think about our strategy, but they can also help us have better strategic thinking about things that are going to work in the marketplace. So let's talk now about stocks and flows. I'm going to give you 3 very straightforward bullet points on this. The first is a system can be described as a series of pools that are connected by pipes. The contents of one pool will flow from that pool into the next pool through a pipe. And each pool has a capacity, and each pipe has a capacity. And the capacity of a pipe can be increased or decreased by management or by events. So let me give you one example that I like to use. If I run a restaurant, one of the stocks that I have is potential customers. And people who've decided that they are going to come to eat at my restaurant, they will move into a different pool, a different stock, which is people who've decided to come to my restaurant. And I can often, on a given evening, look at my restaurant and see those people because in many cases they may be waiting for a table. Okay, they've decided to come to the restaurant, but they have not been processed into actually sitting at a table. When we seat them at a table, that's another pipe, and we process them from the one pool into the next by actually taking those customers and seating them at a table. Obviously, if I run a restaurant and I see that there's a long line of people waiting to be seated in my restaurant, it means that I've been very efficient at getting people into that pool by convincing them that they'd like to come to eat at the restaurant, but I am having some difficulty processing them out of that pool, that is, seating them at a table, as fast as they are showing up. Now, certainly at certain times of the day, like dinner time or lunchtime, you're going to see this kind of thing happen. But the speed with which you can accommodate these people will be an effective thing that happens with customer satisfaction. And so we want to be aware of that, its impact, and also how to manage it. And there are a lot of different ways to manage it. For example, if you have more tables, you can seat people faster. If you have more people seating people, you can seat people faster. And so on. These are all things that we can do to manage that particular flow. So, to give you an example, here is a slide that shows just a pool and a flow and then another pool. And the arrow there indicates that what we're really looking at is a flow from one pool into another pool. So when we do strategic thinking, one of the questions we always want to ask is, what are the pools and what are the flows in between them, and what affects how many people flow from one to another and how quickly they flow from one to another. Now, I just said people because I often think of this in terms of customers, but you can think of pools and flows in terms of almost anything that might flow within an organization. So, a couple things to think about relating to these pools and flows. The first is that if a flow into a pool exceeds the flow out, it starts to fill up. So as more people show up at the restaurant, the line of people waiting for a table gets longer. If the flow out of the pool exceeds the flow in, it drains. So if people stop showing up because it's late at night and it's not dinner time anymore, we will start to empty that line out by seating people at tables. Nothing can flow out of an empty pool. You can't seat people at a table if they're not waiting to be seated. And also, nothing can flow into a full pool. So if your restaurant is completely full, every table has someone sitting at it, you can't put people anywhere else, and so the line is not going to move. So those are just some key points to think about. Now let me give you an example of a very simple pool and flow concept, and it's one that I teach in my Simplified Strategic Planning seminar. It's the happy customer process, and the happy customer process starts actually with a pool of customers that have a couple things in common. Usually they have some unhappiness about something, like the people going to eat at a restaurant. I'm hungry, I want to eat. But they have money in their pockets, okay? When you put them through the happy customer process, it's a very simple level. You process them into happy customers. They flow out of that process as happy customers, and of course, they also flow out of that process with less money in their pockets. And this is the nature of almost every business I've ever encountered. That is, what you're doing is taking people who have a need, you're serving that need, and you're taking some money from them at the same time. So here's an example of a more complicated flow, and it's one that I see quite often, and that I call the customer cycle. And the customer cycle starts with the pool of potential. These are potential customers who might buy from you. The conversion process is usually the sales and marketing activity that goes on to convince them they want to become customers and actually converts them into customers where they've actually placed their first order. Okay, once a customer has placed their first order, you now have an experience with that customer, and that customer has an experience with you. And if it is positive, you can go through what I call the secondary conversion, where you're actually converting that first order into an ongoing relationship with the customer. If you manage that very well, a pool of happy customers that you have an ongoing relationship with will also lead to an increase in your pool of potential customers as they talk to other potential customers about how great it is to be a customer of your business. So that's a cyclical pool, and these kind of cyclical processes have a very interesting trait that can be mathematically demonstrated. And the trait is that if you see a small improvement in your effectiveness in any one of these conversion processes, over time you will see an exponentially growing effectiveness of the entire cycle. So it's a good idea to have these cycles, to understand what makes these cycles, and also to do everything you can to unblock the flow from one stage to the next in this customer cycle. Another example of a flow that we might consider in strategic planning is the value system. The value system starts in strategic planning with either identifying or building in the organization some advantage that you have over competitors. that advantage can be translated through effective sales and marketing into a perception of value in the marketplace, where customers perceive that what you are selling them is more valuable. That perception of value will draw more customers to you, and as it does, your market share will go up. When your market share rises, of course, your competitors will notice what you are doing, and they will look at the value proposition that you are succeeding with, and they will automatically, and I say automatically, it's not 100% automatic, but it's almost automatic. Some of them will try to imitate it if they want to stop the loss of market share to your company. And so advantage leads to value, value leads to competition. And that's a very normal progression in a free market, and that's one of the reasons why sometimes people refer to capitalism as a destructive system. That is, anything that works today is unlikely to work in the future because other people will copy it. That's the process they call creative destruction. So how do we use this in our strategic planning? The first is we can identify the flows in our business. So we can talk about what can flow into our work and what can flow out of our work. We can have money and people and operational requirements flowing into your work, and what flows out of your work can include money, products and services, operational requirements, or anything else. And sometimes these systems can be very complex. I once went through this exercise over a period of about 2 days with an airline, where we were diagramming the whole system and how it affects customer preferences and the customer experience. And it was a huge diagram with lots of intricate things. And the fun thing about that was we found that there were just 2 or 3 points where if we improved what we did operationally in those areas, we could improve the customer experience considerably over other airlines that were competing with us. So how do we manage flows? A couple things I want you to think about. First of all, we can manage flows better if we can predict how flows are going to change in the future. That is, if you see flows fluctuating and you see that ahead of time, you can make accommodations. One example, let's go back to the restaurant example, is if I see a lot of people coming to eat at my restaurant, let's say a bus pulls up in front of my restaurant, I can make accommodations that will enable me to seat more people faster because I see that coming. If they call ahead of time, if the bus calls me the day before they arrive at my restaurant, I'm going to get more servers in. I may, temporarily move some more tables into my restaurant or try and figure out how to have more space for people to sit down, and that will enable me to manage the flows better, okay? That increases the efficiency of the operation when you can predict how flows are going to change. And the restaurant example is just one. Most manufacturing businesses are well aware of this type of thing. The second is the pool size can change. If you can really predict huge changes in flows, let's say for some reason an area right next to your restaurant becomes a huge tourist attraction, and you know that over the next year you're going to see a hugely increasing number of customers coming into your restaurant, then you can change the pool size in your restaurant by changing the size of the restaurant, adding more tables, buying more real estate in the area. You can hire more servers and so on. You obviously, if you need to, you can also expand the area that they might stand in line on. What you want to do is have them stand in line in a place that's not as visible from the street in some cases. In other cases, having a line that's visible from the street may be taken as what's called social proof. That is, it's proof that your restaurant is good because people are standing in line to eat there. But other people may choose not to eat there because they don't like standing in line. Flow management itself is something that you can pay attention to too. If you see flows rising or falling or getting out of control, you can take steps to decrease it. For example, in the restaurant example, one thing that I can always do to decrease the flow, if I find my lines are unmanageable, is I can raise my prices, and I can make that very prominent and something that people talk about, that, oh, did you know this restaurant raised their prices? Now, it has the effect of decreasing the flow because I have fewer customers coming into the restaurant, but it's also going to decrease the line. So as a business owner, I may have to make a decision. Do I want to do that because it improves the customer experience, and coincidentally, it also increases my bottom line because I'm charging higher prices. So these are just some examples of how we manage flows. So how does system dynamics work? Because system dynamics is the more complex consideration of how these things all interact with each other. First of all, system dynamics is an area of study that you can take courses on in some of the great schools. I mean, a lot of this comes from professor at MIT named Jay Forrester who did a couple of courses on this over the years, and you can study it for a whole semester. But the whole idea here is we want to optimize system efficiency, and that means we have to compare things like what is the cost of increasing or decreasing the pipeline, what is the cost of increasing or decreasing the size of the pool, and how can we make things flow more efficiently. One of the key things to efficient flow is that in any system like this, the capacity of the system is defined by the narrowest bottleneck in the whole system. So if you imagine all these pipes being connected, it's the smallest pipe that's going to define the capacity of your system. So if you have a very limited ability to cook meals and feed people in your kitchen, it doesn't matter how big the line waiting area is, how many people you have seating customers, or how many tables you have, you are going to have a problem processing them into customers that have been fed because you can't get food out of the kitchen quickly enough. A second area of system dynamics that's important to understand is the different types of systems. I'm going to talk about each one of those in turn. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit more about system efficiency. First of all, I said better prediction is better efficiency, and ability to manage the flow is better efficiency. Also, I said greater pool size allows accommodation, but there's less efficiency because it usually costs money to increase the pool size. So types of systems. The first is steady-state system. A steady-state system is usually one where the inputs and the outputs exactly match. That is, 5 customers show up at the restaurant and want to eat lunch. It's very simple to feed them lunch, and then they go out, and it's very predictable. You know exactly how things are going to work, and you don't usually see lots of accumulation. You don't see people standing in line. You don't see people waiting for their checks and so on. There are usually very high levels of predictability. This is less common in restaurants. It's often very common in things that can be planned well over a long period of time. For example, I worked recently with someone who was looking at laying out water mains, a water treatment system for a large community, and that's a very predictable system. You know if X number of people move into that area, you're going to need so many gallons of water delivered to each household, and most businesses are going to need so many gallons of water. So huge levels of predictability, very stable. There's a very high expectation of efficiency. That is, delivering water to a home in a community that's been zoned and planned very well is something that you should be able to do for pennies a gallon. There's very little change affecting this type of system. Now, oscillating systems tend to have a lot of change, and the change can move up and down periodically. Usually that happens in a cyclical system. That is one where the stock level can affect flows positively or negatively. So, for example, if I look at the population of cougars in Montana, the number of cougars actually can affect how many cougars have cubs that year, because if there are too many cougars, they're hungry, they're less likely to have cubs, and what that means is the cougar population will go down. If they're well fed, their population will start to go up again. And so what that means is if you look at the population graphs of almost any natural ecology, you'll see populations go up and down because the stock level affects what happens to that next year. It's a very, very organic system. It also tends to be the case in economies. That is, if you look at the economy, everybody talks about how we have an economic cycle. And that's very, very true. A free market economy tends to look a lot like an ecology. The second type of system, or the third type of system, is what we call a geometric system. And this is where a flow or increase or decrease is exponential and does not reverse. So in the oscillating system, the reason why the cougar population starts to decline after a while is because too many cougars causes overpopulation, starvation, competition for resources, and that causes a decline until it reverses and starts moving back up again. In a geometric system, there is no limit. There's nothing that causes a natural limit to things. So, for example, I see this time and again with, for example, internet usage. If you were planning internet usage on a college campus, if you were building highways, the number of lanes that you put into a highway into a big city, these are things that no matter how big you make the pipeline, people will use as much of it as you make available. And so the use is always geometrically going to increase. If you create an easy way to use a free resource, there tends to be no limit to the demand on that resource. This tends to have a finite life, however, because ultimately we do find some limit that it's just the number of people who are willing to commute into Los Angeles or something like that. It can, however, end in a catastrophe. But it can also be the beginning of an oscillating flow. That is, if you think of what a sine wave looks like, the first part of the bottom end of that sine wave does look a lot like a geometric progression. So sometimes people make predictions based on seeing that kind of upward sloping curve, and it actually turns out to be a sine wave. A really good example of that right now is what's happening in the personal computer industry. A lot of people are saying, well, because we have different devices that people are buying, tablets, and they're using their phones for the things we used to use computers for and so on, that there's really been a slowdown in people purchasing computers. But the reality is what's happened is computers have stopped being the rapidly growing new technology that tends to have this sort of geometric type curve, and it's found its limit. And the limit is really, once everybody has a desktop computer, they're not going to buy two, and so they become more like, you know, microwave ovens or something like that. That is, everybody wants one, but you don't want 12. So the next thing I want to talk about beyond this whole idea of systems thinking, which I think is an important one, I could talk about it for hours, is understanding people's minds. And there are some general ideas that affect this, and there are also some things that you really need to understand how people's minds are going to affect your strategic thinking. You also want to understand that there are certain strategically important behavior types and how we can categorize people's thinking. The first thing I want to talk about is how the ideas that affect strategic thinking. First, you need to understand how people in your system think, and the people in your system will include your customers, your employees, and your suppliers. There may be some other people whose behavior is going to affect you, and you need to understand that too. Most people are going to act in specific ways, but there are always variations. So we can statistically come up with a prediction of how people will act in general, but it's not going to give you an ironclad way of predicting how one person is going to act in particular. And we always need to remember that people make choices for their reasons, not yours. I think, you know, their reasons may be very varied, and they may be in direct opposition to some of yours. Most customers, for example, one of their reasons is, I don't want to spend more money than I have to on something. So they will always try to find certain things for less money. It's not always true, but as a general rule, people tend to want to buy things that are cheaper, even if they're a high-end customer. So who do you need to understand? I said different types of people: customers, employees, competitors, but also suppliers and investors. We might want to understand their thinking. One of the ways to understand thinking is to look at customer behavior in particular, and we focus a lot of effort on this in Simplified Strategic Planning. It turns out that in all types of businesses of all sizes, there's a strong positive correlation between profitability and market share in a target market the customer is actively going after. And one of the implications of this that I think is really interesting is that market share can be built up by a couple of different things, and it can also be taken down by a competitor who's going after a couple different things. Ultimately, there are two behaviors that really affect this. The one is the people who, you know, market share goes up with this type of person because you're offering them more and more, and they buy because of what they get. There are other people who buy more from you because you offer lower and lower prices for a relatively undifferentiated product, and they buy because of what you pay. Okay, so it's the what you get versus what you pay people, and in Simplified Strategic Planning, we refer to this as specialty and commodity behaviors. These behaviors are very important, and a specialty customer is going to buy because they see that you have a unique product. They may say, look, I buy this because I like this product or this service. And you're going to have stronger margins or profits per dollar of sales from that type of customer. A commodity customer buys from you because your price is lower than other people's. So the people who go to Walmart or the people who fly on Southwest Airlines, they like to buy from those companies because they see the products as largely undifferentiated, and they also see them as having low prices. And you tend to see weaker margins or profits per dollar of sales, but we hear a lot about commodity companies for one specific reason, and that is, in order to be successful as a commodity business, you must have larger sales than anyone else. So these tend to be the largest companies. They are not necessarily always the most profitable companies. Your typical positioning, you notice, with a specialty, we have value-based pricing. With commodities, competitive pricing. With a specialty, we exceed customer requirements. We hold their hand, give them lots of support. With a commodity, it's an undifferentiated product, so we just barely clear the hurdle because the low price is the differentiator. So in a given market, you'll see a distribution, a normal distribution of orders for that product. That is, at the low end, suppliers are scarce because they don't want to sell at low prices. At the high end, customers get scarce because they don't want to buy at high prices. So there's sort of an average industry price level. What we find, and this is true, a very interesting behavior, as you move from the commodity level at the bottom of this page up to the top, which we rated just by quality in this example, but you can see that the shape of that curve gets broader and broader. So in a pure commodity, there's just it's almost one single vertical line is the definition of the price for that product, whereas in a specialty situation, you can have a very broad range of possibility. You can have low-priced commodities and you can have high-priced commodities, and really in some cases the sky is the limit on the high prices. Competitive strategy really breaks down to targeting these two different customer behaviors in a couple different ways. If you're going after mass markets, the specialty strategy is what we call a differentiation strategy. It boils down to a lot of advertising, which is nice, except it's also risky. And the reason I say it's nice is look at the volume and the margins are both very high in this strategy. With a commodity status, the volume is high, but the margins are low. And that's not as nice, but it's still big volume. In a niche market, you have low volume, which we don't like as much, but there are high margins, so it's okay. And an alley shop is the worst of all of the four. That is, it's low volume and low margins. It's the one strategy I would not recommend to anyone. Now, there's another area we need to understand about people's thinking in strategic thinking, and that is how people inside the organization behave. And there's one thing I run into a lot that I'd like to just briefly share with you, and that is something I call the tension triangle. The tension triangle is built out of a basic understanding that we are creatures of optimization, and we tend to optimize around whatever is immediate to us. So in work environments, people tend to optimize around their job. Salespeople like to make choices that will optimize sales volume. Financial people like to make choices that are going to optimize financial performance. And operations people are going to make choices that are going to optimize the operational effectiveness of the organization. And that all sounds great, except that often these things compete with each other. For example, optimizing sales may involve making promises to customers that are very difficult for the operations people to meet. And making the operation work really well might require that we invest a lot of money that might damage our financial performance. So there's tension between these things, and it's important in strategic thinking to understand that that tension, if it is not given a way to resolve itself in sort of a top-level look at your strategy, will tend to lead to what I refer to as local optimization. That is, people saying, we're doing our job, we're doing great because the operation is great, and they don't pay attention to the strategic effect on the markets or the finances. So, with that being said, I'd like to move into the third key to strategic thinking, which is strategic competency. And I want to talk about this fairly briefly, but I think it's a very important and powerful concept. A competency, you'll see here from the slide, is know-how. It's a combination of skills, processes, and knowledge. And a strategic competency does two very important things that I want you to be focused on. The first is it creates value for your customers. So a real strategic competency is a type of competency that is valuable to your customers. A strategic competency is also going to differentiate you from your competitors. So it will make you more unique. And those two things are the most important effects of a strategic competency. That third, being difficult to copy, is kind of a gimme. If it's going to make you unique over a long period of time, it's going to be difficult to copy. I seldom see people claim a strategic competency with something that's easy to copy, because if all I have to do is go and spend $10 to get it, your competitors are going to go spend that $10 as soon as they figure out what you've done. So a good way to think about this, I think, is to just look at how we think about work. Hard work is important, okay? And for most people, if you want to have a successful career, you want to work hard. But success in most careers comes from doing things that are easy for you that other people find hard. And this is also true for companies. That is, there are things that are easier for you than they are for other companies. And they may still be things that are hard to do, but they're easier for you. And I've worked with some companies. Just last week I was working with a company that we were looking at their different businesses, and there's one type of business that they're doing a lot of, it's growing very rapidly, and they're making a lot of money on, but they're constantly complaining about how hard the work is. And we had to sort of reframe that a little bit and think about, well, yes, it's difficult work, but that's why we're getting it. So a strategic thought around that type of work is, how can we make it easier for us to do this type of work that other competitors don't want because it is difficult? A good way to visualize this is something I call the Island of Profitability. And the Island of Profitability is just conceptually some place, and it's usually a concept. It's not a geographic thing, but the closer you get to that thing, the more money you make at it. So the example I used in the seminar for would be like Disney is very good at family entertainment, and the more a product or service is about family entertainment, the more likely it is Disney can make money at it. And they've tried doing entertainment that's not family. They don't make as much money at it. They've tried doing family things that aren't entertainment, don't make as much money at it. The same can be said, for example, for Honda, who's very good at anything that has a small engine in it. 3M, who's good at anything that's flat or sticky. Those are their islands of profitability. If it's in that space, they're going to make more money, and the farther they get away from it, the less money they make. So one way that we do this, and this is a good tool to think about for your own strategic planning, is you can rate your competencies on this very simple chart where one axis is the value and the other axis is uniqueness. Obviously, you'd like to be high and to the right, and that's what we call the big bucks box up there in the upper right-hand corner. That's where you have high value and high uniqueness. And most really, really successful large companies have something there. Most profitable companies have something in the next tier down, which we call the profit zone, where you've got moderate to high value and moderate to high uniqueness. And the lowest profitability occurs in the big L-shaped outer rim there in the lower left. And I call that the so what zone. I don't care if you have high value, if everybody else can do it. It doesn't differentiate you. I don't care if there's high uniqueness. If your customer doesn't value it, they're not going to pay for it. So it's worth thinking about what competencies you have and lay them up on this chart and think about what zone they fall into. So one of the key concepts we can use with strategic competency is a concept we call strategic focus. And the strategic focus is what determines, it's not what you're focused on, it's what determines the scope of what you're willing to do, what determines the scope of your products and the scope of your markets. An example would be products or services. If I am an auto parts manufacturer, auto parts is obviously a product, and that is my scope. I don't make anything, I don't make boat parts, I don't make refrigerator parts, and so on. If capabilities were my focus, I would say I do anything I can with a certain range of capability. I see this quite often with machine-based capabilities, with a machining or tooling company. I see it with human-based capabilities, for example, with an accounting firm. I don't like this strategic focus as much because it tends to become commoditizing if the capability is not actually unique. Markets or customers will be people who sell all kinds of different things to one specific type of customer. Technology is a little more rare. 3M is a good example. They have a thin film deposition technology they use for all of their products. So they'll make tape and magnetic tape and discs and adhesives and Post-it notes and anything they can with that technology. Raw material supply would be like a forest products company, anything we can make out of trees. And method of sale or distribution would be like Avon, who they'll have the Avon representative sell whatever they can. And those are just examples of strategic focus. The reason I present this when I'm talking about strategic competency is that there's a really, really strong correlation between long-term profitability and having a real strategic competency that matches up with a disciplined strategic focus. So I want you in your strategic thinking to consider what is our strategic competency and how does that define our strategic focus. And of course, we cover this in much more detail in our Simplified Strategic Planning seminar if you want to learn more. Whenever I talk about this, I think about something one of my fellow speaker friends said a while back in a speech that I heard. He said, what can I do in this moment that would be the exact opposite of everyone else? And his idea was that in today's markets, being different is far, far more important than any other way you can be better, because it puts you into a category where there is no competition, and improvements in information technology and communication have put us into a place where when we see something unique, it becomes, if it's remarkable and valuable, it becomes something that everybody else knows about pretty quickly. So that being said, I want to talk to you very briefly about just the strategic planning process and how strategic thinking fits into this. I think of strategic thinking as something that you obviously need to do in the left box here that's called planning. When you're doing strategic planning, good strategic thinking is important. And on a day-to-day basis, when I'm working with companies on their strategic planning, I'm helping them do better strategic thinking in their planning. But I think it is also important that you have good strategic thinking on the right side of this chart. When you are doing your day-to-day life, in your execution of your strategy, in your monitoring of developments, good strategic thinking will help you understand how your day-to-day work interacts with the strategic plan that you've created and interacts with where you want to go. So I encourage you to not just do strategic planning, but also do a little bit of thinking about your strategic thinking. So what do you need for successful strategic thinking? You need a sound approach, you need commitment, you need integration into your management process, enthusiasm, and good leadership. I hope I've given you some good tools for thought here that you can use, and I want to give you a few other little tidbits. First of all, I've got a couple of articles on strategic thinking that are on our website, and if you have this, you can just link to it, I think, or type that in, or search on strategic planning on Google, and probably you can find it. And also, we have a seminar I've mentioned a couple times on Simplified Strategic Planning. If you've attended this webinar, you can get a special price on this. It's normally $18.95, but we will offer you $900 off on this program. And all you have to do is go to this URL. You can also call Elizabeth Tidd at the number that's on the slide there, 995-3465 and area code 734. And she can set you up. And of course, we do full consulting. A lot of what I've learned about this has happened as the result of things that I have done with companies like your own. So don't hesitate to call us if you want to find out more about that. Finally, of course, if you have any additional questions, here's my contact information. And I've got my email there, and you can check out our website. We have a treasure trove of information, articles, and tools that you can use in your strategic planning, and we encourage you to use all of those. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you got lots of value out of this, and I hope to hear from some of you again very soon.
Thank you, Robert. We've had some questions come in. Do you have time to answer those, I assume?
Okay.
Do you have any examples of companies changing what they do because of their exposure to your strategic planning approach?
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time. And quite often it comes from this strategic thinking approach. That is that, I'll work with a company that will sit and look at a situation. One I was just talking about, the company said, boy, we're getting this type of work that's very difficult, and we don't like it because it's affecting our profitability. And when we pick that apart using the systems thinking modeling approach, what we found was we were pricing this work about the same as all the other work we were doing, but it's a lot more difficult in their operation to actually do it. So we were getting all of it. That is, we were, when you looked at our market share within that segment of the market, what we realized was we were getting all of the really difficult stuff because we weren't charging any more for it. We figured out a way to charge a little more for it, and we still get almost all of it. We get 90% of it now. We lose a few people on price, but they usually come around and come back. And because we raised the prices now, we're a lot less unhappy about having that really difficult work to do. And we're happy to pay the best people we can hire really well in that company to handle that kind of work.
Thank you. Another question. Is this something that only applies to simplified strategic planning, or can it be applied more broadly?
I would say I've seen situations where this has been applied, especially in operations and with customer-facing employees, extremely well, because if people have a good understanding of strategic thinking, they can look at a situation with a customer and ask questions about what is the impact of the choice I'm going to make here going to be, and is this a customer that is a specialty customer or commodity customer? That maybe affects me. if I do something to help this customer, is there going to be a long-term effect that increases the number of people asking for this type of help in the future, or is it a one-shot deal? And these are really important questions that not just your management team, but in many cases, everybody in your organization should have some understanding of this, because they can make choices that make things work better or worse for your company right on the ground in front of your customers in many cases.
Good, thank you. One more. How can you tell the difference between strategic thinking and tactical thinking?
I think the key differentiator I look for in between strategic and tactical thinking is that strategic thinking is always going to consider more than one point in the system, okay? And what I mean by that is, if I am a customer service agent in an airline, just as one example, and I make my choices a certain way, I know I can make my job easier, but it might create difficulty for other people in the operation. It might, might create difficulty for the flight crew, or might create financial difficulty for the airline. And even though I can make the tactical choice to make my job easier, I may choose to make the strategic choice to get a better payoff for the whole system. And I think that, what I'm really talking about is the thing I referred to earlier as local optimization. Where I see local optimization, I usually see people who are making tactical decisions rather than strategic decisions. And you can justify those decisions very well with the metrics of your department, or maybe even the metrics of the whole organization. I think about the airline industry. They made a tactical decision to start charging for checked bags a few years back, and a lot of them are undoing it now. Why? Because they didn't think strategically. Strategically, if you use systems thinking, you can see that charging people $25 for checking a bag is going to cause all of the people on the airplane to try to bring all of their luggage onto the plane if they possibly can. And what that does is it slows down the loading and unloading of the airplane. It actually costs more to do that than the $25 that they're getting for the checked bags.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you, everyone, for attending. If you have questions, please do contact Robert at rbradford@cssp.com, and do check out our website at www.cssp.com. Thank you all for attending, and this is the end of the webinar. Goodbye, and thanks.